doing recording. Okay. The landlord might not be showing discrimination towards this tenant who's from somewhere else, but another tenant could be targeting them, harassing them, telling them to go back to their country, things like that. When you've been notified as a housing provider that these things are happening, then you must take action against this. And we actually have information that we can send to the housing providers on resources on how to go about making sure they're telling people, if that's putting a flyer on everyone's door, mass email, and writing people up, going through the process of any violation. This would be a violation under your lease for disrupting someone else's home. I can't hear you.
Because we as housing providers are expected to have an equal opportunity environment, right? Okay. There is always that rare exception. In this case, federal housing programs do require proof of citizenship and immigration status, eligible immigration status. So if a federal housing program asks for this information, it's not illegal. Right. So the feds tell everybody what to do, but the feds also say, and we have programs designed specifically for and lawfully for certain reasons. So it's not illegal for them to ask.
Okay. So this is our midpoint, our halfway. Does anyone need a 5-minute break? I know we kind of get interrupted earlier. I don't know if you all stretch during that time. Did you guys shake it loose? All right. All right, I guess we'll keep going. Okay, so the next portion of this is reasonable accommodation, RAs, and reasonable modifications. This is a lot of our work specifically, so I'm sure everyone will be very, very interested in this portion of it as well, because this is what we do a lot, and a lot of people have questions about what are reasonable accommodations and modifications and how to go about that.
That's the same nationwide, as a matter of fact. It's the #1 allegation of discrimination is disability. It outpaced race. The second would be family status, but we're going to talk about disability here for now.
And RAs, reasonable accommodations, what they're here for is to like balance the scale. So people with disabilities may require special needs to ensure equal access and equal opportunity to use and enjoy and dwell in their home or common areas. So that's what really reasonable accommodations are. So to balance the scale that you get to dwell in your home, what's going on there, people with disabilities as well might need some extra support or some help to enjoy their home as well.
Okay, so the definition of disability under the Fair Housing Act is very, very broad. Okay, it's a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activity, or a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such impairment. And I want to clarify here, we know that the word impairment is definitely not a choice word anymore. A lot of folks with disabilities do not take kindly to this word. We are putting it here because that's exactly how it's spelled out in the Fair Housing Act, and that's why it's here. But we understand that it's perceived as not a great word in the disability community. Okay, so that's a pretty broad definition, right? If you think about that. Limits one or more major life activity. A major life activity is breathing, seeing, walking, eating, talking, going to work. A lot of very varied things. So this is a pretty broad definition. Now, the state law has made it even broader. So what the feds don't give you, the state does. And the state says, we also include temporary and mitigated medical conditions. In this case, the lady has crutches. She's hopefully temporarily disabled. She will mend. She will be able to walk again without problems, probably. So it's temporary. But during this temporary time, she may ask for a reasonable accommodation based on her disability-related needs. Okay?
Also, high-risk pregnancy is a
Mm,
temporary disability.
correct.
Just wanted to throw that out there.
Mhm.
So a reasonable accommodation, it's an exception to a policy, rule, practice, or service needed because of a disability. So exception to the policy, rule, practice, or service needed because of the disability. So all these property managements, landlords, they have policies and rules. What we're asking for is the exception. If it's not reasonable, meaning it would impose an undue financial administrative burden on the housing provider, or it would fundamentally alter the nature of the housing provider operations, then that doesn't qualify as a reasonable accommodation because it's not reasonable. Who can ask for a reasonable accommodation? A person's with a physical or mental disability can ask for a housing provider to change the rules, so a reasonable accommodation needed because of the disability, and it is reasonable. So it has to have those three things to be a reasonable accommodation.
Sounds pretty basic,
Basic, pretty
but
simple.
so many things can go sideways here. Okay. This is what a lot of folks are thinking, right? They don't say it necessarily, but what they're wondering, if they're the housing provider or if they're the neighbor or an observer, they may be thinking, but is this person really disabled? This really disabled? What does that mean, right? So you have to consider disabilities are visible, invisible, obvious, not obvious, shared, not shared, mitigated, unmitigated. Sometimes they're worse, sometimes they improve. And that will help you determine whether the person may need a verification of their disability, right? If it's invisible, how do you know they have a disability? Or it may help you determine whether someone may need verification of the need, right? The need, what it is, how it connects to their disability may not be obvious. Okay, so you never know if someone has a disability. We don't want housing providers going around, do you have a disability? Do you have a disability? Do you have a disability? Do you need a reasonable accommodation? Do you need a reasonable modification? No, 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 no. They're really supposed to stay out of it unless approached by someone who says, I have a disability, and because of the disability, this is what I need. Okay. When must an accommodation be granted? Well, we just told you, when the person has a disability, there's a nexus or connection between the disability and the accommodation, and it's reasonable. So we talk about SSI because it's one way that a housing provider may or may not know that a person has a disability, right? If they get disability income, they've been put through the rigors of the federal government, the state government to determine they have a disability, and therefore they are eligible for this disability income. So that may verify that the person has a disability, right? But it doesn't necessarily verify what it is that they need because of the disability. It just says this person has a disability. Conversely, a person may not receive disability income at all and still have a disability under the Fair Housing Act, right? So you can't just assume because someone doesn't receive SSI income that they don't have a disability. They may well have a disability. Okay.
When can a reasonable accommodation be requested? Anytime. whenever needed. So at the beginning of tenancy, middle, or end, because life happens. Sometimes you become disabled in the middle of your life, and different things happen. So, or at the end, if you need something at the end of your tenancy before you move, you very well can ask for a reasonable accommodation during that time.
Right.
So
Sometimes we
anytime.
get housing providers sometimes that say, well, they didn't need it when they moved in. Well, no, maybe their disability, maybe they didn't have a disability at that point.
Mhm,
Or maybe their disability was at a certain stage, right?
mhm.
And now it's progressed and become worse, and they do need something. So it doesn't have to just be at the beginning of a tenancy. Okay.
Oops.
Okay. The request does not have to be in writing. It can be verbal. It can be made by the person with the disability. It could be made by their family member. It could be made by their caseworker. It could be made by their independent living specialist. Hey, I'm working with this person. Here, they need a reasonable accommodation. They have a disability, and here's what they need. However, we highly, 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 capital highly, recommend that you get it in writing, because people tend to have, memory fade over time, or something could change within the tenancy. You could get a different management company. You could have a different owner. You could change the name of the complex changes, and who's taking, who's on staff changes. And now it's forgotten that you have this accommodation in place, right? So as
Mhm.
long as you have it in paper with a date and everything, that's going to help you establish and maintain that.
Yeah, and the reasonable accommodation request needs to state that who you are, that you have a disability, that you need this reasonable accommodation because of your disability. And then you're going to state in the letter what exactly you need for the disability. So is it a service animal? Is it a reserved parking space, etc. So make sure those 3 points are in the letter, or you state that verbally. But again, we highly recommend that you have it in writing.
Okay. And we have a question in the chat that I just want to get to while we're here.
Okay.
It says, how does a person with an eviction on their record that was directly related to the disability, but now that's resolved, or, maybe the disability is in treatment, or maybe that disability has dissipated. Is this a reason for asking for accommodation to the eligibility criteria? I would say yes. If you have a disability related incident, and now that disability is managed, or you're receiving the support that you need so that it no longer is an issue, you could ask for an exception to that policy or rule, and say, this was a disability related incident. And if you can, and, it's helpful to provide documentation about that. It's a very good question.
Good one.
Same
Yes.
same thing with, trying to prevent eviction, trying to keep someone housed. Let's say they've been successfully housed, and now they've lost access to their medication and they're having an episode. But if they can get that medication back on board in a short period of time and get back on track, they should not be terminated. They should be allowed that additional time to get that support in place and return to being able to function with their disability and the support that they have, and the medication that they need, or the treatment that they need, the insurance, the therapy, the counseling, whatever it is that has enabled them to be successful all this time, right? Just because they've lost access to that doesn't mean they should be automatically terminated. Now, the behavior can't continue if they're having an episode and it's disrupting everybody's peace and quiet enjoyment. That can't continue indefinitely, but you might be able, through a reasonable accommodation request, ask for additional time to get those supports back in place and explain they were there, it was successful until now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it helps people maintain housing sometimes.
Is that all the questions? I can't see
That
them.
was it in the chat. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, the person says they were stabilized and they're now stabilized. Correct, right. So they had an incident, but they're stabilized now. They should be allowed in.
So now we're going to take a look at some examples for reasonable accommodations. And we're just going to go through the rule and the exception that they're looking for. So the rule for this one is first come, first served parking. And the exception due to the disability is reserved parking spot. So that's what would be listed in the letter. That I have a disability, I need a reserved parking spot because of my disability.
And on that one, I want to just say, to expand a little bit with some examples, we oftentimes have uh, uh, landlords or property managers who will get this request from a tenant and say, oh, sure, just use the blue spot.
Oh.
Just use the blue spot. That's yours to use. That actually doesn't work, because now you're going to have, then the next person with a disability asks for a parking spot and they say, yeah, just use the blue spot. Okay, how many blue spots are there? Not enough, right? And now you have warring people over these blue spots, and they start harassing each other, and it's a terrible recipe. So those blue spots are supposed to be vacated every once in a while, right? They're not supposed to be occupied all the time. They're meant for visitors with disabilities, somebody who's coming to maybe apply. They're not,
Paratransit.
yeah, paratransit. They're not meant to be occupied 24/7. If someone needs a reserved parking spot, they should not have to pay any additional fee. The property management company should put up an additional sign that says this spot reserved for so-and-so, or this spot reserved for apartment number X, or car license plate this. And furthermore, they should maintain the sign and enforce the sign. So if they say, yeah, we'll give you a reserved spot, but then they don't put up any sign, they haven't really actually fulfilled the accommodation, right? If they say, yeah, we'll allow you a spot, but then they just let everybody park there and they don't tow someone who violates it, they haven't really granted you that accommodation, right? So they have to all the way fulfill that. Put up a sign separate, not a blue sign, not one of those blue signs that invites everyone that has a placard to park there. Okay, that's what I want to expand on that.
So another example is the rule is no occupant except the leasee. And the exception is that the person with disability needs a live-in caregiver. And live-in caregivers do get background checks, but they are not put on the lease. So they are not financially responsible for said unit. So we always make this very clear to people who call us and might need this, that it's not a roommate situation where somebody's paying half of the things. If the caregiver leaves and there is a bill left, the person on the lease, which is usually the client who asked for the reasonable accommodation, is responsible. So that always kind of gets tricky, but the caregiver does have to pass the background check.
So if a caregiver can't pass the background check, is that a denial, Cicely?
No,
What does that mean?
it just means that you can have a caregiver, just not that caregiver. So they're not denying that you very well may need a living caregiver. Just unfortunately, that person might have a severe record or might have endangered children in the past, and there's families there. So there's going to be some a little bit of guidance for that, but you can definitely still have a caregiver. It just might not be that particular person.
Yeah.
So you might want to ask or prompt your person to say, hey, so this person you're asking the living caregiver, make sure they know they will have a background check run on them.
Right. And they have to follow the lease. They can't disturb and, be violating any of the rules, just like any guest you have. Right. Okay.
So another one is the rule is no lease break and penalty. So what you're asking for is an early lease release with no financial penalty. Sometimes due to your disability, the unit that you're in is not suitable for your disability at this time, and you need to leave and find something more suitable. So you definitely, because of the disability, ask to be released with no financial penalty so you can then meet the needs of your disability somewhere else. Another rule is 60-day termination. This is common to have 60 days termination. If due to your disability, if you need your tenancy to be extended, say you had back surgery or something like that, and you need to put in order some ways for someone to pack up your items, box your items, ship your items, and do those things that you can't do, or the things that you are doing, it takes you a little bit longer due to that disability that you have with your back, then you can ask for to be extended due to your disability. So it's not to say I'm going to live here indefinitely, or let me just take another 6 months to pack my stuff. Not like that. It has to be reasonable again, to extend their tenancy there to make sure they get all their things in a row so they can go to another place.
Right. And we have a question in the chat, a couple of questions. So if they're denied an early lease release, okay, so remember, about any accommodation, it has to be reasonable, right? So if they're asking on the last day of the month, and this is the first time it's come up, I need to break this lease and not have a penalty, and I'm informing you, the housing provider, on day 29 of a 30-day month, it may not be considered reasonable that they not pay the following month, right? Because typically 20-day notice to terminate your tenancy is considered reasonable. So you want to err on the side of reasonable. If they're needing it on the 29th of the month, they may be responsible for the following month. And you could ask as another reasonable accommodation that they be allowed to pay a payment plan on that. So early lease releases, we've seen a lot of times with elders. They sign a lease and then the next month they go to the doctor and the doctor's like, wow, you really are in a position that you need to go to assisted living, right? And they're like, oh no, I just signed a 12-month lease. What am I going to do? Well, the doctor will write a letter, this person needs a lease release. Because of their disabilities, they need to go live with family or they need to go in assisted living. Please release them and not penalize them. If they're denied, you want to call us first. We'll try and resolve it at the local level. Because like I said, remember the HUD process or the state process is going to take quite a while. So try and get a hold of us. We'll advocate on your behalf, on behalf of that person, and try and get that ironed out. Hopefully they won't resist when we encounter them and people can move on with their life. If they still resist, with our strong and firm educational stance that we take very diplomatically, then your next step would be to go to HUD or Washington State Human Rights Commission. The second question in this on the, they said, could an extension be based on a temporary disability? And the answer is yes. And Cicely's example was that, right? Like if someone's having back surgery within 10 days of when they're supposed to be moving, it's not going to happen. That's a temporary, they're expected to recover from that disability, right? So maybe they can't lift 5 pounds or more for several months, but they should be able to, give them a little more time to get other people lined out to get that move taken care of or something for them, right? Maybe just they need maybe additional 30 days just to get home and get their wits about them, get somebody else lined up to help them move, just extend their tenancy a little further. This one, the 60-day tenancy extension thing, that's not as common anymore because the state law changed. Remember, rule used to be 20-day termination notice. And when it was 20-day, that's when we'd see a lot of these we would process because people just with their disabilities, 20 days was just not going to be feasible even. They needed to find an accessible unit. They needed to find something on a ground floor. They needed to, all these things limited what they could find that would work for their disabilities. And so during those during that time period, it was much more common. Now, you know, you're starting to push against the reasonableness factor. If you go beyond, much beyond, like, let's say the 60-day termination notice, let's say another 30 days, you're going to start pushing against unreasonable because it's already been given 60 days.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, this is also state law is starting to remedy this as well, I think. But just in case, you can ask if you have disability related income to have your rent sync up with when your disability income comes in, so that you're not having late fees and that sort of thing, which would make your ability to live and enjoy your dwelling, you know, much more difficult just because you have disabilities and disability related income. So if rent's due on the 1st and your income comes in on the 3rd, you could say, could I please have my rent be due on the 3rd or the 4th? And that should be granted for you. Again, when it starts being the 24th or the 25th or the 27th, you know, that's when you start pushing up against reasonable again. And so you may have to figure out a way to accommodate that in a different way. This is the one that's the can of worms for everybody. Reasonable accommodation, the rule is no pets. So people can advertise no pets, right? They can advertise no pets. But if you ask for an exception to that no pet rule and you say, I have an assistance animal, I would like to live in your housing, but I do have an assistance animal. Could I have an exception to your rule of no pets? That should be granted for you. Now, you might need to verify the disability. You might need to verify the nexus, the need for the animal, right? If you have an invisible disability or if it's not clear. So for example, epilepsy is invisible. Somebody may need a dog for their disability of epilepsy because the dog does alert for that person. They may not receive disability income even. They might be a college student that's, you know, they've got their epilepsy pretty well managed, but they need this dog to alert them. So they can ask for the exception. And they might have to verify with a letter from a healthcare provider saying this person has a disability, and because of the disability, they need this assistance animal. And we just call them all assistance animals. You
Mhm.
will hear a million different names, right? You will hear therapy dog, physical alert dog. You'll hear
Emotional support.
support animal, companion animal, psychiatric support dog. You'll hear
Yeah,
all kinds of terms, but really we don't care. Why? Because the certification that we're looking for is about the person. Does the person have what? A disability.
disability,
Because of their disability, do they need or require X?
this animal.
Right. And unfortunately, there are a lot of predatory companies online that now provide certification for your animal. For $90, you can get a little plaquette or a certification paper that says, you know, BB the squirrel is your emotional support animal. But do we care about BB the squirrel's credentials? No, and neither should the housing provider. The housing provider needs to care about, does the person who's making the request have a disability? And because of their disability, they need BB the squirrel in their housing. Okay. I use squirrel because, you
Yeah,
know,
tickled me. BB the squirrel.
because in housing, okay, that's the other thing, you know, we get confused a lot. We get a lot of questions that interface with the airlines, you know, can you take a turkey on the airlines? What about, you know, what about service animals? Well, that's the public arena, ADA, right? So the ADA governs the public space. We are not part of the ADA. We are part of the FHA, Fair Housing Act. The ADA is for libraries, grocery stores, you know, the post office. The ADA has very, very strict animal allowances. It can be one of two animals, and they have to perform a service, a specific task for the person. That's because you're in the public. But in the home, it's a private dwelling. You have more expectation of privacy and containment. It can be different species of animals,
Mm-hmm.
right? It could be a bird, a fish. It could be a rabbit, a cat, a dog, etc. That's why I said Bibi the squirrel. I
Yeah.
actually knew a Bibi the rabbit that was in housing. So it's a little broader. You can have different species, but in ADA, all you can have is a dog or a miniature horse. Yes, you heard me right. A miniature horse. Because they use miniature horses as seeing eye animals. And if you look them up online, it's really awesome. They have these miniature horses that live an extraordinary length of time and therefore can provide service to their visually impaired or blind owner for much longer, and that person does not have to go through a variety of loss with these different dogs that can only have a limited time of service of about 6 to 7 years because of their age and the amount of training they go through.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's the public sphere. That's just the public. We don't deal with the public. We deal with just housing. We don't deal with the airlines. That's a whole nother set of rules. So in housing, it's a little bit broader and more relaxed. Now, can the animal just go crazy? No, that's what this slide's about. This
Yeah, so
slide's, oh, go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah. So the assistance animals are auxiliary aids. So just like the cane and the walker and the wheelchair, so is the animal assist in that context, right? So the housing provider can't charge a pet deposit, but can charge for damages caused by the assistance animals. Like Shannon was saying, the animal can't be crazy. So BB the squirrel cannot be chewing through the walls or things like that, storing nuts in the walls. So the housing provider can issue standard 10-day notices for the animal's behavior. So if the dog is constant being noisy, jumping and lunging and biting, things like that, unacceptable. Running loose, not under any control, unacceptable. And you're not picking up the waste of said animal. That's not okay either. So the owner needs to be given the opportunity to cure the issue. So just like your wheelchair might bump up against a door frame or a cabinet and scratch it over time, scratch, 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 that's wear and tear. And the landlord would have you pay for those damages or take it out of your deposit. So you can be charged for those things if the animal is tearing up the unit. That's, you know, out of control in a sense. So just like any of these things that you have that you're using, walkers and things bumping up against things, the same with the animal. If the animal has scratched up some sort of area, they can charge you for damages caused by the assistance animal, but initially cannot charge you a pet deposit because it is not a pet, it's an assistant animal. How many reasonable accommodations can a person request? They're unlimited. They're case by case consideration. And ignoring or delaying a response could be perceived as discrimination. So some people will call and be upset and say, maybe some landlords will say, well, this person already has 2 cats and now they're asking for a reasonable accommodation for a dog. I feel like they shouldn't have this many assistance animals. And that's what the landlord said. That's not what the third party verification has stated, which is the doctor's note. If they say they need another assistance animal and there's verification for that, then they are able to have that. So it's unlimited. Say you have a couple assistance animals, but now you also need a first floor unit. You can ask for that reasonable accommodation to be moved to the first floor. So it could be different ones. We have this picture of these rocks stacked in different shapes because you're just stacking different reasonable accommodations on things to dwell in your unit. Case by case, that's just the emphasis of making sure whatever RA they're requesting is needed due to the disability. You know, sometimes someone might think that they need A, B, and C, and really that's not what they need. They might need something else, but that is for their doctor and them to decide what exactly that looks like. And then we have reasonable accommodations requests going out by the tenant to the landlord, and then it's just ignored, or they're just really delayed in their responses. And if the tenant gives us a call, we can perceive that as discrimination, that they're purposely doing this to this person due to their disability. Sometimes they don't think that their tenant has the whereabouts to even give us a call, ask for help, seek counsel. Maybe they're in some of your forums and presentations, and then they realize, oh, I can ask someone and someone could assist them and say, oh, that's not okay. And so it gets into that, which then that can go into a HUD complaint or Washington State's rights complaint.
So we talked about third-party verification. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be an MD, right? Because it needs to be a reliable third party that knows about this person's disability. Now, maybe a family member knows the best about the disability, but that would be considered a biased verification. If HUD were to look at that through an investigation, they'd be like, well, that's pretty close. You know, how about a third party that's a little more at arm's length? So a doctor, a doctor's assistant, medical professional, peer support group specialist, somebody who's a non-medical service agency, like an independent living specialist, something like that, counselors, therapists. And the landlord can ask for that verification if either of those things are not obvious, right? If the disability is not known or obvious, and if the need is not known or obvious, the nexus to the disability. So it has to be because of a disability. Now, oftentimes we are like, people start thinking, accommodation, I'll just use this to solve all the problems of all these tenancies. But it doesn't work like that, because you have to have a disability, and it has to be because of the disability that you have this need. Right? Okay. Next. Housing providers, we encourage housing providers to not do any of this. Do not ask for details about the disability. That's basically saying, don't delve into the nature or severity of the disability. Don't be asking, so have you been hospitalized for this? Do you take medication for this? How long has this been a problem for your child? Don't ask to see medical records. Don't seek speaking out to their healthcare provider. You know, it really starts to look like you're delving into an area you don't really belong to be doing. I wouldn't want my housing provider calling my doctor. You know, if you're going to call, the only thing you should be calling about is, did you write this? Did you send this? That's it. Is this yours? Is this your letterhead? Don't ask questions about the disability, the treatments, all of that kind of stuff. And the healthcare providers shouldn't be providing this anyway because of HIPAA laws, but you'd be surprised at the number of verification letters that we've seen where the healthcare provider actually writes, feel free to contact me and talk to me about this further if need be. You know, not a good idea as a housing provider. Can the housing provider make the tenant accept a different accommodation? Basically, no, because the person with the disability knows what's best and will work and function for their disability. But you may suggest other ideas for other accommodations that might work because of limits that you have, you know, about the parking area or what have you. You can certainly brainstorm with the tenant, see if there's anything else that might work. But the tenant doesn't need to agree to that if it won't meet their disability related needs. So brainstorming and creativity is excellent, but they're the ones in the best position to know about what it is that will meet the disability related need for them.
All right, reasonable modifications. So we did reasonable accommodations, and modifications are a structural change needed because of a disability to units and public common areas in a dwelling. Here are some examples of reasonable modifications. So we have a wheelchair ramp, color on stairs, grab bars in bathrooms, and a roll-in shower, lights and alarm systems for the deaf community, also blind community. They might need more noise to alarm them of anyone at the door, things like that. And these particular doorknobs, sometimes disabilities can't twist the handle a certain way, and their assistance animals can support them by opening doors that have a more of a lever type latch. Could be helpful for them if they're in a wheelchair and need something, your dog can definitely do that for you. So these are very helpful, and these are just a few examples of modifications.
And they're good ones because they show both common areas, right? This might be a ramp to a main entry, or it might be a ramp to the laundry room facility, or the stripes on the stairs, that's a common area. Some of these others might be unit specific, right? What you want to do though, when you ask for a modification, especially if it's as extensive as a roll-in shower, you sure as heck better document it on paper, because you need to know what's going to be expected should you ever move. Are you expected to return it to how it was beforehand? Good question. And this is the kicker. Who's going to pay for the modification? So you can ask for the modification, and the housing provider could say, absolutely, great idea. You need this for your disability. I approve it. And then who has to pay for it? The resident, typically. And what ends up happening? The resident has a disability and they're on fixed income. They can't afford to build that ramp or change out the levered handles or put in a roll-in shower, right? The only exception for the resident is if they live in federally funded housing. Federally funded housing is held to a higher standard. And so they actually have a budget line item for modifications in the housing so that they're considered more accessible. So if they're in federally funded housing, the owner of that housing, the landlord, manager, property management company, is responsible for the cost and installation of those modifications, the grab bars, what have you. Unless, of course, it's unreasonable. So I live on the 3rd floor. There's no elevator in the building. Whether I have a temporary disability or a permanent disability, I can no longer make it to the 3rd floor, and I ask for them to install an elevator. Probably not going to happen, probably not considered reasonable, right? But I could ask for something else. I could ask for a ground floor unit. I could ask to be transferred to a different property that they manage that has a ground floor or accessible unit for me. It may take a little bit of time because, pressures on those units are great because there's so few of them. But certainly there's other reasonable accommodations if you can't get up there, if the elevator won't meet your is considered unreasonable, right? The other idea is that there are a lot of oftentimes we've had people overcome the difficulty and the challenge. Yes, the housing provider says you can put in the ramp, but they can't afford to, so they turn to the VA if they're part of the veterans family community. They turn to social service agencies. I know at one time SNAP was doing stuff around this, or Catholic Charities. Maybe someone at their church will help them pay for it to be done. They can look for a volunteer service project. I've seen the Gonzaga rugby players do stuff. And I don't know, there's other creative ways, maybe the Veterans Thrift Handyman, or I don't know what. Now, the thing is, you just want to be sure and get it in writing so that you know whether or not you have to return that modification to the way it was before. If the modification will not impede somebody else's use most likely it doesn't have to be restored. So I'll give you an example. If I ask to broaden a doorway so that my wheelchair can get through, and I pay for the doorway to get broadened, and of course I do it in a workmanship-like fashion, and I get bids and estimates, and I do it all right, do I have to return and restore that door frame back to skinny when I leave? Well, most likely not, because it doesn't impede anyone else's use, right? We can all still pass through the big wide doorway. And in fact, it probably would be considered an enhancement of that property, because a 36-inch wide doorway is much more likely that anyone can pass through, whether that's somebody able-bodied, disabled-bodied, or with a child in a stroller kind of thing. So that would not have to be restored. But if I ask for the counters to be lowered because I'm using a wheelchair and I need everything at wheelchair height, that's going to be expensive. And yes, the housing provider could ask me to restore that to standard height when I leave. So they might even ask for an escrow account to be established. So these are getting into different, like Cicely said, case by case scenarios. And if you want any pointers, or it smells like fair housing, or you're starting to go down one of these roads and you need to, kind of think about what are the pitfalls here, feel free to give us a call. We can guide you as to how you might want to do that, because I did have a client who had some plenty of resources, and he was in an apartment building and he was allowed to put in a roll-in shower, and it cost him $22,000. And a month before he left, the property management changed hands. Nothing was in writing. And the next property management that came in, and he had moved out a month later, said, "Sir, we've destroyed the roll-in shower, put it back to a stand-up, tub and shower situation, and you now owe us another $2,000 for having to restore it," and he had to fight that out. So get that in writing, whether or not there has to be an escrow, etc., and whether it has to be returned, or whether you can leave the ramp in place because it's in a common area and it's helpful to all the residents there, right? If it's in a common area, you most likely don't have to restore it either.
All right, looks like we're coming to an end of our presentation. So just a summary. The Federal Fair Housing Act prevents housing transaction discrimination based on the protected classes. The 7 protected classes we mentioned, so race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and familial status. The Washington state law against discrimination does this as well and covers the 4 additional ones, protected classes: marital status, veterans,
military,
yeah,
family status,
families, yep,
immigrant and citizenship.
You threw me off. So those are the other 4 that we have. Landlord-tenant laws are often self-help, as they are self-enforced and require legal advice and legal action. So remember, that is when Shannon was going through the slide where one side was landlord-tenant and the other side was fair housing. So that's commonly evictions, income, repairs. That is a landlord-tenant law. So that isn't us. Everyone still can call us and we will guide them to the landlord-tenant laws, which is seeking legal assistance for that. And then the people with disabilities have extra protections with reasonable accommodations and modifications. So they're the only group in the protected classes that could ask for reasonable accommodation due to disability. So that is their extra protection that they have with their reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll see if anyone has any questions.
You can enter them in the chat,
or unmute
or you
yourself.
can unmute yourself. Any burning scenarios come to mind?
So I'm thinking of familial status. And I'm specifically thinking of a client that I have that has been working to get custody of her 3 children back. So for rapid rehousing, she was able to put those kids on her program enrollment because a social worker had provided a reunification letter. Well, over a year later, do you think she has her kids? No, she doesn't. And she was able to find a 3-bedroom within her 2-bedroom amount. But now we're coming to the point of, what do we do as far as a Section 8 voucher? What kind of accommodation, or is there any to request from the landlord, or you know what I mean? Is custody and that at all included in familial status?
So familial status would be having children, minors in the household, right? Or about to come into the household. So, for example, housing providers can't have too restrictive occupancy limits. It shouldn't be, if you see 1 per bedroom, that's too strict. It should be in general 2 + 1 per bedroom, which allows for a couple to become pregnant, adopt, foster a child, right? So if this person doesn't have minors in the household, I mean, they don't have minors in the household. They don't have them. If when they have them, they were discriminated against, that would be a problem. So when the grandma who has plenty of space in her home to kinship care, right? She has a 3-bedroom apartment she's been paying for, and suddenly CPS assigns the children to her,
Gotcha.
then she should not be told you can't have kids here,
Right.
right?
Gotcha.
She should be allowed to kinship care her children. She might have to change and add them to the lease, but she shouldn't be told. And she also shouldn't be told the sleeping arrangements should not be part of the discussion with the housing provider. That's up to the parents and the caregivers to decide. A housing provider should not be saying, well, what's the sleeping arrangement? You can't have a boy and a girl in the same room. You can't live here because you have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, and there's only 2 bedrooms, and this is how the sleeping arrangements need to be. No,
Right.
no. A 2-bedroom should be about 5 people, 2 + 1 per bedroom, right? So 5 minimum could be in a 2-bedroom. Family status, where we see a lot of stuff about family status is, and we didn't include these slides, and that was a mistake by us. I totally suddenly own up to, but is overly restrictive rules that specifically target children. So we have had complexes that are clearly multifamily complexes. They're large units, and there's so many rules about having children that the children literally are not allowed outside. You know, they're not to be anywhere on common grounds without an adult or someone over 18 at all times. That's excessive. That's overly restrictive. They can't even be on the playground that's there for them to play on unless they've got an 18-year-old with them. No, that's overly restrictive. They can't send their 14-year-old to go get the laundry in the laundry room without having an 18-year-old or an adult accompany them. That's overly restrictive. The beauty of those kinds of cases is oftentimes there's a lot of writing to support those cases. There's a lot of notices, fees to parents, fines to parents, little newsletters that go out to all the parents. Remember, kids, don't be going anywhere without your adult, you know, this kind of stuff. Those make for great family status cases because that's overly restrictive. It's making parents be on eggshells about having their children live and enjoy the dwelling and the common areas, right? They're all of a sudden just sticking them on a screen all the time because they don't want to have $100 fine for their children being unaccompanied, even though they have a range of children, you know, a 16-year-old with the 4-year-old. There shouldn't be a problem with that, right? Or saying, or making rules. Okay, everybody get your toys off, get your kids' toys off the lawns. That should be a rule. That rules are good, rules are needed, rules are necessary. They help, you know, govern places, but they should be broadly applied. Okay, everyone remove your personal belongings on Tuesdays. The mowing company's coming. It shouldn't be just get your kids' toys off the yard, right? It needs to be broadly applied. If it says no running in the halls, it should just say no running in the halls, not, hey, no kids running in the halls. If someone's getting notices for noise because their kids are crying, they also should be getting notices for their cocktail parties that are late at night and going loud, right? Equal treatment. Equal treatment. We saw a lot of that during COVID, and it was a nightmare because all of a sudden everyone was at home and working from home. And so who was complaining? Everyone was complaining about who? The kids, because the kids were now at home all day long. And so were the workers who wanted their quiet offices, right? Or the senior people who were used to the place emptying out during the day, nobody being around. But now all of a sudden, everybody's there all day long. And so you hear much more and you see much more, and suddenly you're interacting much more with people. That's starting to dissipate a bit. The tenant on tenant harassment stuff was going through the roof with COVID. Oh my gosh, people were on their last nerves, and they would say the most awful things to each other. But they also knew much more about what was going on with each other's business because they were home all the time. So instead of just hearing from senior communities about everybody being up in everybody's business, we were hearing about every community being up in everybody else's business. Now, harassment. Yes, we get that broadly applied. People say, so-and-so's harassing me. They're harassing me. Okay, but is it about the protected class? I mean, are you guys having a parking war? Are you having a trash issue? Do you just not like each other and get along? There's no law that says you have to like each other and get along. But if it's because of a protected class, like Cicely said, national origin, sex, religion, race, right?
Disability.
Disability. You know, we know people use really aggressive, mean words and disparaging words to people with disabilities. That's harassment based on a disability. Okay, but it can't be just harassment of like we're having a parking war. I mean, that needs to clearly be resolved by the manager, but it's not based on a protected class. I'll give you a really good example about that. There's a community north of here, predominantly white, because we're predominantly white here in Spokane. And we had a family call us that said, you know, we're a Black family. We have a lot of kids in our family. And every time that our kids congregate in the common areas, bring, 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 we're getting notices and we're getting told, you know, dissipate. And what's this? Every time our kids use the pool, we're getting told there's a problem. So, you know, it really did feel that there was a racial basis to this. It wasn't just families with children, because there were a lot of other families with children, but none of the neighbors were calling the office when it was white kids that were congregating, right? If they saw a bunch of white kids in the same area of the parking lot, they didn't call the office. Oh, trouble's a brewing, right? Or a family moves into a, you know, a complex. Again, they're the only family of color. And they're not there more than one day before they're getting notices about moving the pool furniture. There's other families with children there that have moved the pool furniture and didn't get any notices the entire time they're there. What's going on there? So that's how it's a comparative thing. Okay, let's see. Did we have any other questions in the chat? I don't see any.
Did we answer, does this include those that have a temporary disability as well? That was at 12:30. Do we? Okay. I didn't get to see any of them when I was presenting, so.
We got that one.
And
So
then, Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. So one of the things that's happening a lot, you guys, I don't know if you're advising people with disabilities or if they're in your class, but applying for housing is really difficult when it's all online. And right now what's happening is oftentimes you can't even get to the next screen if your income is from disability, right? Because it'll ask you for an employer. So we would like to know about those instances. If you hear that, a common refrain is, I applied, it was through this kind of a application program. They usually have names. And I couldn't even get past the second screen, and I asked for an accommodation for a paper application and they refused to give it to me. Okay, that would be potentially fair housing violation, because it's limiting access to someone with disability. They should be able to apply and move past that. So as technology keeps changing, we keep coming up with new accommodations, right? Technology, all the residents need to pay their rent on the portal. How many of you have ever heard of that? Yeah. And how many of you have residents that go, I got the rent right here, but I don't know how to pay on a portal. I've never used a computer. I have learning disabilities. I go, I get my money order, I take it to the office. This is what I've done for 20 years. They should be allowed to, you can ask for an accommodation to have them pay their rent with a money order, as they have been doing. They don't have to do it on the portal if their disabilities preclude them from doing so. All good ideas, right? All creative ways to kind of help somebody with a disability not be limited in their opportunity for housing, or to not be able to maintain housing because you can't pay the rent on a portal. Really?
Yeah. So we definitely want to hear about these. If you guys have clients who are running into these property management companies that are having them do portal stuff, not getting past the application after the first screen or the second screen, we definitely like to know which company that is and which system they're using. Some of them is Appfolio. It's a real common one. There's another one. Shannon, do you remember? There's another one called, I just heard actually from the west side of the state, called us and was asking us about it. So anyway, if there is that issue, we'd love to hear who that actually is and what wouldn't what you couldn't get past. Was it income due to disability? Was it even email address? We had a client that had a disability and and couldn't and didn't feel comfortable getting the email address. And the management said that he was going to have to vacate the unit because he couldn't sign a signature via the portal to renew the lease. And this gentleman has already been there for, I believe, 7 years. And since they've all moved to digital now, he didn't have an email address to go in there just to sign. And it was a fight for him to walk into the office and just sign his name to renew his lease.
He had
So
disability of autism, doesn't use a computer, lives with his mom as an adult dependent.
yeah, he sends his rent on time. He has everything in order, paper form for him. That's what works. All his bills get paid. And they just were unwilling to work with him. And luckily his mom had heard about us and gave us a call, and we assisted him through that. Because that's not okay, because it's, so you can't do our portal, so we're going to evict you. That, you can't, that's
No.
crazy.
Someone threw in Acronet. Acronet isn't the application program. That actually is one of the screeners for credit history oftentimes. And there's some barriers to housing that we can't help with that are really difficult to hear about, but they have to do with, credit scores. I've got a really low credit score. Okay, yeah, I mean, shoot, you got to build that credit score. I don't care if you got this big a budget nowadays. If you don't have a credit score that's above a certain point, you don't even get anywhere. You could have income up the wazoo, but if you have a terrible credit score, you can't get in. That's not a fair housing protected class, right? There's nothing we can do on that end. There's nothing landlord tenant laws can change on that end necessarily. That's a market response to demand on housing. Okay, how are we going to weed out these people? We got 5,000 applicants for this one unit. Well, let's just raise the credit score. Then we'll just get the cream of the crop, right? Well, now they can pay the rent. Well, that's not necessarily an indicator of who's going to pay rent, but that's the market believes that. The best indicator of who's going to pay rent is that they've paid rent in the past and that their past landlord says they've always paid rent. That's what's going to indicate rent. You got people who are seniors who've never ever had a credit card. They believe in cash only, right? If we don't have it, we don't buy it. We don't have credit score. Yeah, now you can't get housed. That's something we can't do anything. Another thing might be, let's see, credit score, rental history. Rental history is really, really hard for people who are immigrants and refugee status, right? They don't have any rental history. So we've been trying to say, well, try getting a letter from, if you've been living at the Thrive for 6 months and you've been a good resident there, and if I don't know what their arrangements for paying rent and all that is, but get a letter from them vouching for your standing as a good resident. But when it comes to the online portals, are they going to even have a face-to-face opportunity to ask for that? Probably not. They're going to have to, we advise them to go to smaller landlord companies that are local so that they can actually have a mutual exchange. But that's a challenge. The housing industry is really, really challenging. It's commodified, so it's really challenging. And fair housing is not meant to address all of those things, unfortunately. And again, is it fair? No, it's not fair, but is it about equal opportunity and protected class? That's what we have to look at, right? So alternative documentation to prove who someone is good for immigration or refugee status, job history, if they can get jobs. Of course, they have language barrier, maybe. So then, a housing provider should not be saying though, hey, don't even come into my office and look at what's available. You don't speak English, just bring someone back with you that speaks English and then we'll talk. No, they should be doing the best they can through the limitations everybody has to communicate at that point to, here's availability, let them look at the numbers, give them a paper application. If they go out and find somebody to help them with it, that's great. But they shouldn't be told just to, see you later.
Yes, you can use Google Translate to help.
Exactly, right? Get creative. Get creative
Yeah.
here. Yeah, exactly. That hurts people who are 18 and just got kicked out, like those in foster care, right?
Yeah.
Right? Those who transition out of foster care. Oh man, that's a road to travel. That's a tough one.
I'm trying to work with people like Alexander who work with the youth, because 18 is hard. And then what if you're emancipated prior to being 18? So trying to figure out that as well.
Right. And can't enter into contracts and that sort of thing. Yeah. Yep.
Also, before, when you're saying Google Translate can be pretty useful, but I think people forget too. I lived abroad for 5 years and I had the experience of I understood this language, I could speak it, but when you're stressed out, so just when people assume that because somebody speaks a different language, they don't understand everything that's being said, I always just, explain it as best I can, have whatever to supplement, but don't let those assumptions get in the way either.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
All right, I think that's all. Anybody have any questions? Guess we'll wrap up here.
No, it looks like it's good. And then, sorry so much about everything that happened earlier.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah, you're
Don't worry
fine.
about that. Oh, I do want to do one last plug on something. So today's
tomorrow.
Wednesday. Yes, yes. Tomorrow we have a free showing of a film at the Magic Lantern, and it's called Owned, and it's about the history of housing policy and why things are the way they are now, and what you're running up against in the housing industry. You know, so it includes segregation as well as discussion about how freeways and transportations destroyed housing, or how projects were no longer funded and they were imploded for gentrification, things like that. Very uplifting, heart-lifting things. Okay, you may not leave feeling like super positive, but you'll feel very, very informed as to how complex this issue really is, right? And maybe then it will help you be part of the solution, is what we like to see. So it's a free showing of the film. It's in celebration of Fair Housing Month, because April, believe it or not, is Fair Housing
Fair
Month. So
Housing Month.
in the perfect month. And it's our offerings to the community to celebrate fair housing. So I think we have about, I don't know, maybe 50 free tickets left. It's limited. The theater is limited in size. So get your ticket. I will circulate that with, you know, Angel, you probably already got it, didn't you?
I did. I actually got it twice because I forgot that I hadn't signed up on your mailing list before, and I actually had. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
I can-
feel free to circulate that with all
Okay.
of these folks, okay? Because we'd love to see you there. It's going to
Yeah.
be a mix of people, and we can all just sort of you know, absorb it, and then think about how we don't want to repeat this in our own community, right? We don't want to repeat. If you don't know the history of it, you'll repeat it. We'll build complexes in places that are segregated again. We won't build land bridges over freeways. We'll separate people by race. We'll separate them by economics, and we'll still have the same system. So hopefully this will be an inspiration for you to help be part of the solution, if you aren't already, which you are because you're here. Free date night.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
so much. I appreciate it. And everybody else, please stay, because I do have some stuff I need to talk about as well. But thank you so much, Cicely and Shannon. I always appreciate all of your help and your insight. And I took a lot of notes, even though I'm looking at this stuff every day. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah,
Really.
and one person said in the Way Out Center, they said limited dissemination. That's for evictions. If you can do limited dissemination, which is not us, it's landlord
Okay.
tenant law. Gotta
And
go
they
to
were
Northwest
getting,
Justice
yeah,
Project.
they're getting some pushback from that. And so that's one of the announcements I was going to make. But thank you for mentioning that, because
Yep.
we have an in-house attorney with transitions. And Kathy is looking more into that to get more details when I mentioned specific people getting pushback on that order of limited dissemination.
Okay,
I'm working on it.
good job.
All right. You
Okay.
guys take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great
Bye.
day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Hopefully
Thanks,
it's less
Angel.
Monday. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, thank you everybody for staying. I'm just adding in that chat. The only reason, if you need to add something to the chat by signing in, if you signed in previously, I did check you off, so you're good there. I'm gonna post, I don't know if I have time to send out the email. This is the ridiculously long link, but at least it's a hot link there. That's to get into the Fair Housing, the Owned, that movie they're talking about, that's tomorrow at the Magic Lantern. I'm still debating whether or not to go. I want to, but it is from 7 to 10 p.m. and that's kind of past my bedtime. I'm at that age in my life where I'm like, if I go home, I'm probably going to stay home, but I think I'll hang out downtown or something, because I think that it would be worth it. Let's see, we'll keep going there. I'll keep that in that chat for you guys. So then we'll get on to the next part. Hopefully my screen shares correctly. We'll see how this goes. Yay. Thank goodness for small miracles today. Yet again, I do apologize, you guys, for what happened earlier. Another transitions location started a meeting and they accidentally closed out mine instead of opening theirs. But we're all here, so thank you. Let's go through this PowerPoint here. Theoretically, they're going to show. Don't you love technology? See if it'll let me move it along here. There we go. So we already went through most of this. So we're just going for the road to renting information and updates at this point. So I just wanted to cover some things in this last half hour of just kind of a recap of how to become a partner agency, some information about materials. We'll discuss login issues, classroom expectations that I have set for the classes that I teach, and also just class registration. Nobody's in trouble. So just a name reminder, it is the Road to Renting program, and the name did change last year. I'm getting a lot of calls and referrals from people asking for responsible renter. And there was also somebody posted something on Spokane Homeless Coalition about responsible renter and said they're not able to get in. I did contact them. Somebody I've talked to before, so that was kind of funny. But so just make sure that you are referring to it as the Road to Renting program. Everything has been rebranded and renamed. I'm still using my responsible renter email address because I know a lot of people are reluctant to change, but I do have a Road to Renting email address as well. So if you send to awalker@helpforwomen.org, responsible renter @helpforwomen.org, or road to renting @helpforwomen.org, those all go into a mailbox for me. So if you accidentally send it to responsible renter, don't worry, I'm still getting those emails. Let's see next. How to become a partner agency. If you know someone who wants to be a partner in partner agency, be sure to refer them to me. I've gotten a few program directors who are partner agents, and they've said, hey, we have this friend who wants to be a partner agency too. How do they do that? And in those situations, I can think of 3 specifically. I've actually spoken to those agencies on their own. They're just trying to kind of bypass the correct way of doing it because they don't like the information I'm giving. That information is not going to change. The first year of being a partner agency, there's a $300 fee. And then every year after that, it's a $100 renewal for your partner agency. As part of the MOU or the MOA, same thing, Memorandum of Understanding, Memorandum of Agreement, try to put those together there. Classes can be taught by you through your partner agency status. But if you want to use what you've learned and teach it somewhere else, that is not acceptable. I've had some people who changed agencies and they're like, hey, I was trying to log in, couldn't log in. And it's yes, because you're no longer part of a partner agency. The agency that you're with now is not set up to be. If you think they are interested, you can always refer them back to me. Otherwise, I can teach classes because I am the educator coordinator. I have that, I can take on people who need to be taught the class as well, the materials. I know I got a call about Goodwill and I have to get back to them about that, where they need somebody to be taught, but they're not their clients. And so I take that overflow. A non-partner agency is not able to use our materials. They are copywritten. So just, some reminders there. Talking about materials, you've all gone through that training, and I've talked when I do tenants' rights and responsibilities. I talk about how those questions that I ask and, highlight those, ask those, get a discussion going, a consensus of the answers, cover the answers before I hand out the packet. I finally had a little bit of time and I took all those questions that I used and I put them in a PowerPoint slideshow. I wanted to test it out a while before I made it available to you guys. In the next couple of days, I will put that up on the materials list that you can access on that portal. It's really helpful because I did animate it. So, it'll ask the question, what's the most important responsibility of a tenant? And then, you ask the question, click the arrow, and it'll say paying the rent. So, you can go through it that way for people who want that visual interaction as well. I did get some calls the other day about, the PowerPoints that are currently available on the materials list. Those were done by an AmeriCorps project quite a few years ago, and I do understand that it's needs to be updated. I will be working on that. Like everything you guys are going through, we're super understaffed. It used to be the responsible renter educator coordinator and 2 AmeriCorps that would help co-teach and help, with materials like that. Now it is just me working 35 hours a week and doing other responsibilities. So I'm doggy paddling in the ocean right now, but we're starting to get to closer to the shore. So we're getting a couple new people and things. So I will be working on those. I will update the Finding the Home slideshow first. If you see anything that you've noticed that if you do use those, you're like, hey, I'd like to see this, or this is really outdated, feel free to let me know and I'll make sure I incorporate that into the changes because I do appreciate your guys' feedback. Boom, login issues. The internet can be a wonderful place when it works. To log in for everything, it's through WordPress, and I create your usernames and passwords. And I keep it, everybody at your agency who is trained is able to use the same username and password. It makes it easier that way. Otherwise, there's too many restrictions on me setting up your account. However, once you're logged in, make sure like you download, save those to either, save that information on a flash drive or your hard drive and log out. If you just close the window, you're still logged in. You need to log out. I do understand that there's a couple of agencies, and my office mate has watched me yell at my computer where you have to repeatedly click log out, and it may take a while. I understand that, but please log out, because if you have somebody else at your agency who's trying to get in, you may be preventing them from being able to do that. I see that question there about the estimated date. With the tenants' rights and responsibilities, at least those questions slideshow, I am going to be sending that to somebody today to update that and put that up there. And that's just a supplement to the packet. So eventually there'll be a full tenants' rights and responsibilities slideshow as well. I'm going to start addressing the Finding a Home one at the beginning of May. So I hope, fingers crossed, the end of May, it will all be up and done. I might be painting myself into a corner there, so I will say early summer. It's definitely there. Thank you for that question. Because of all the issues with lockouts and everything, usually every year I update the password. I am not going to be doing that this year. It's just save everybody some pain and suffering, so your passwords will stay the same until the end of 2023. I almost said 2022. I'm living in the past. It happens. This is just something I do. So now I'm trying to be more visual because I am teaching classes at the library and Cento Commons, so we have use of the screens. So I show what the schedule is for the classes I'm teaching and also classroom expectations. So, just a reminder to have phones on silent or vibrate, take space, make space. Some people tend to talk more than others. So make sure that everybody has the opportunity to be heard. Sometimes people are like, hey, I'm quiet and I'm okay with not saying anything. That's cool. Something that I have unfortunately had to add is inappropriate language is not accepted, and racial slurs and other forms of hate speech or behaviors will not be tolerated in my classes. I've had some issues, but usually I can just say that's not acceptable if you can't deal with this. But I do anticipate that there may be a time where I have to just flat out ask people to leave the class. If that happens, I just wanted to let you know. So if you ever hear in the community like, hey, I tried to take the class and I was kicked out, there is a very good reason why that happened. Hasn't happened yet, come really close. And I don't want it to happen, but I just want you to be aware of what I'm doing, where I'm coming from. And also, If you didn't feel that way before, I hope you feel that you comfortable enough to be able to do that for yourself as well. That's not acceptable. For class registration, I'm saying no drop-ins. I have noticed, I had a class where I had 5 people signed up for, registered for, and 12 showed up. Case managers are called and asked about class availability. I'm always cool with, you know, you can ask me, hey, is there an opening for the class? If you give me the name of the person, or at least say I have one person who's coming, that really helps me, because when I'm off site, I'm bringing all of my materials with me on a city bus. So, you know, I'm bringing the sets of all of the different materials. It gets to be a lot. So I only bring enough for who's registered for the class plus 2, just in case. So I don't want to have to turn anybody away, but yeah. And the whole thing is, you can have somebody sign up to the night before a class, as long as they're calling, you know, before 3 o'clock. If there's space, I will get them in the class. It's just, I don't need the surprises, because I'm just afraid that one day I'll have all of my students show up and all these extras, and then I won't have enough materials. And when it comes to registering, you know, you as a case manager, if you have somebody you need, you can always email me or send a phone call, voicemail. I'll get back to you. I'll register people. But if you have clients who are like, I don't know, I'll figure it out later, they can always call me as well, or send an email to my email address, and I can register them. And anytime I have made that contact, I do notate that and register them for the classes. So yeah, that's why I said registration for each class is open until the day before said class. And that's just because if I'm traveling for the class, I don't have time to really check my email or my phone. Trying to think of a couple other things. I'm trying to keep the same pattern for where I'm teaching my classes. Unfortunately, somebody beat me to the punch for May's class at the library, so it will be in a different room. So I'm putting the time back from 9 to 3 to 9:30 to 3:30, because I anticipate people will get lost in the library, and I might as well. But yeah, I try to keep it where the second and fourth week of each month is when I do my classes. So the second Tuesday will be at Cento Commons. That same week, that Thursday, I do the class at the Women's Hearth, where I try to keep it all women or people who identify in the female spectrum. The fourth Tuesday and Thursday of the month, yet again on that Tuesday is at Cento Commons. And then that fourth Thursday of each month, I try to do where I'm teaching at the Central Library. Talking a lot. I don't know if you guys are familiar too. I've been trying with the newer trainees of talking about how if you need a space to use to teach classes, the library is really great. I reserve the room with my library card, and you can choose the size of the room. So you can go, I usually use conference room A. I'm really stuck on that one. I like it. But if it's just one-on-one, there's, you know, the study rooms. And it's pretty nice, because that way you can kind of have more neutral ground, I feel the library can be. So that's pretty much everything out of me. Do you guys have any questions or anything that I can help with possibly? I know it's a lot. I think everybody's wiped out from everything that happened today. I really appreciate your flexibility. I'm impressed how quickly you guys got back in once we could be here. So every day is herding kittens in different ways. This time I was the kitten that tried to make a break for it. So thank you so much. Also, the invitation always stands, even though you guys are, you know, you're more established in teaching the classes. If you ever want to observe still, I'm totally cool with that. It's always nice to see different people's just how their personality comes out in different ways is really useful. And, you know, sometimes sometimes I'll have people who, they're like, hey, this class worked out really well for me. Like there's not a clash, but if there's a clash, it's nice to know like, hey, my style might not be good for you. Maybe this person will be good, just to help out everybody. The other thing is I just want to thank all of you guys for what you do, because it's a lot, and there's a lot of information out there. And so it's just nice that we're all kind of helping each other out and getting people set up where they need to be. Yeah, I'm talking a lot for my 16 minutes of just, I feel like I threw out a lot at you guys, but yeah, thank you so much. I will be working on those as the time comes, but the first thing will just be those PowerPoints of the tenants' rights and responsibilities, questions and answers. Also, sorry, fun fact, I just had a fire marshal inspect my apartment complex earlier this year, and I sat and observed because I was like, hey, I want to see what goes on now that they're doing more inspections, now that COVID, you know, moratorium's lifted and everything. And before, I was under the impression that with smoke detectors, they just needed to be outside of the bedroom. So if you had 2 bedrooms that were near each other, but you had the smoke detector outside both of them, that was fine. I believe that has changed. So I know personally, renter, property manager, like when they did the walkthrough, like, okay, we have to actually add a smoke detector inside each bedroom. So that's kind of news to me. See, everybody's learning about those fire marshal visits. That's useful information though. They also had to secure my water heater. So it was kind of just there, ready to lean if something burns. So, so yeah, it's interesting to see how laws are changing. Other thing I'm thinking of as I start to ramble is when Shannon Bedard was talking about the about people who like receive SSI or disability and not getting their check on the 1st, but maybe the 3rd, or I've seen the 6th even. There is a template for a request of changing the due date of your rent, and that can be found at washingtonlawhelp.org. They have the letter for that, and also for the payment of rent. So they do have a couple of templates there. I think you just have to go, you know, washingtonlawhelp.org and go to tenants information. It's kind of buried in there, but I do know I've printed it off a few times now, just to know that there is a template for that. And it's also nice to get the recap again of what's Northwest Justice Project's purview and what's Northwest Fair Housing. So you can always know where to find that information. But yeah, I think that's everything I have to share for this year. I am doing a train the trainer on Thursday, May. Oh my goodness, I need a nap. Thursday, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. I will be doing a training at the library. It's limited space. So far, I do have 6 people registered and I have room for about 15. But if you know anybody who needs to do that training, I did send out that link for the registration, but you can always shoot me an email and I can get that information there. Is there a form for splitting the rent if you can't pay all at once? I'm not sure if they do have that form on Washington Law Help, but I did see that there is also a form for requesting a payment plan for deposit. So maybe there's one there. Yeah, I think
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate all you guys yet again, and please run free in the world and have a good rest of your day. Yes, it's getting cloudy. When we got shut down for this, I ran to the front to try to find some help, and I noticed it was my office window faces the alley. It was sunny in the alley and snowing up front, so that was a surprise because it's April and I don't like that. So it's not now, but it was a couple hours ago actually snowing for a bit. depending on where you were in Spokane. So stay warm and stay safe. And thank you so much for today. Bye.